There are people from your past who stay in your memory as a particular version of themselves, frozen, preserved. The person they were at the moment things ended. Not who they might have become, not who they were becoming, but exactly who they were in the moment the door closed. For 14 years, I carried Vivian that way, frozen at 31, standing in the doorway of my apartment on a night in November with her coat already on, saying the words I had spent the years since replaying and reinterpreting and building a whole understanding of who she was around. And then, on an ordinary Wednesday morning in March, I walked into a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and she was standing in line ahead of me, not frozen, not 31, 45 years old, her hair different, her coat different, but unmistakably, completely, and undeniably, Vivian. She turned before I could decide whether to say something or step back or simply wait and see if the moment resolved itself without requiring a choice from me. She turned. She saw me, and the look on her face, the specific quality of it, the complicated mixture of recognition and something else I could not immediately name, told me that whatever happened next was going to require something from both of us that I had not been prepared walking into a coffee shop on a Wednesday morning to give. This is the story of what happened next, and of what I learned, about Vivian, about that night in November 14 years ago, and about the particular damage that an unasked question can do over the course of a decade and a half. I am not proud of all of it, but I am telling it anyway, and because I think some of you need to hear it. Vivian and I met at the University of Michigan in 2002. We were both 23, both in the same graduate program in English literature, the same alcove of the library, the same late seminars, the same habit of walking home through the campus after evening classes and talking until one of us reached their building and the conversation had to end whether either of us was ready for it to. She was from Portland. She had a dry, precise sense of humor that announced itself without warning and a habit of making observations about people and situations that were so accurate they bordered on uncomfortable. She read everything. She cared about everything she read. And she had the quality I have come to value most in another person. She was honest in a way that did not require an audience. And she was honest because she believed honesty was simply how you treated people you respected. I respected her immediately. Loved her eventually in the way you love someone who has seen the actual version of you. Not the version you present, but the version that shows up at 2 a.m. when something has gone wrong and you need someone who will not perform comfort, but will actually provide it. We were best friends for 7 years, through graduate school and the first jobs and the apartments that were too small and the relationships that were too short and the slow, complicated business of becoming actual adults, rather than people who were performing adulthood while waiting to feel like they belonged in it. She was the person I called first, in both directions, good news and bad. She was in the front row at my first public reading, and she was on the phone when my father had his health scare, saying nothing useful but being there in the particular way of someone who understands that being there is the whole job. I believed the same for her, or I believed I was. And then November came, and she stood in my doorway with her coat already on, and she said something that I heard one way and, as I would understand 14 years later in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, she had meant entirely another. And instead of asking what she meant, I let the door close, and kept it closed for 14 years. That is the part I am least proud of, but I am getting ahead of myself. I need to tell you what happened in November, or rather, what I believed had happened in November for 14 years before the coffee shop. I had been offered a job and a teaching position in Chicago, a good position, at a good school, the kind of opportunity that in the world of English literature, academia, represents a significant step. I had told Vivian about it the week before. She had been quiet in a way I had read, at the time, as hesitation, as uncertainty about whether she was happy for me. We had both been living in Ann Arbor. We had built our lives around the same city in the way of people who have stopped assuming they will eventually move apart. The Chicago job would change that. It would put 300 miles between us and the life we had built in proximity. Vivian came over the night before I was to give my answer. We had dinner, and then she put on her coat. I remember the coat specifically, a dark green wool coat that she had bought the previous winter. And she said, "Nathan, I think you should know that I've been offered something too, in Seattle, and I think I'm going to take it." And then she said, "I don't want you to factor me into your decision. We'll be fine either way." She left, and I stood in my apartment with those last words, "We'll be fine either way," and I heard them the way I was inclined, in that particular moment, to hear them. I heard, "I am not factoring you into my decision, so you shouldn't factor me into yours." I heard, "This friendship is already over in my mind. I'm just telling you officially." I heard rejection, preemptive abandonment, the message that I had mattered less to her than I had believed. Pause. 5 seconds. I took the Chicago job. I moved in January. I did not call Vivian before I left. I told myself she had made her feelings clear, and that she had essentially ended things herself, and the polite thing was to let the ending be clean. She texted once in February, a short message asking how the move had gone. I replied briefly, politely, with the particular careful distance of someone who has decided that warmth is no longer appropriate. She did not text again, and that was that. For 14 years, I believed that Vivian had walked away first, that the friendship had ended because she had chosen to end it. I believed that completely. I had built an entire understanding of who she was around it, and every part of that understanding was wrong. She looked at me across the coffee shop line for a long moment, and then she said, in the same voice I remembered, lower and more careful than most people's, at the voice I had not heard in 14 years, she said, "Nathan," not a question, a statement, a recognition. "Vivian," I said. We stood there for a moment in the particular suspended quality of two people who have a great deal of history and no established protocol for this specific situation. And then she said, "Do you have time for coffee? I mean, actual coffee, not just the one you're here to get." I looked at my phone. I had a meeting at 11. It was 9:15. "Yes," I said. "I have time." We ordered. We found a table near the window. We sat across from each other in the morning light, and we looked at each other in the way of people doing rapid, silent inventory, assessing the 14 years of change in each other's faces, the ways age had arrived and the ways it hadn't, the evidence of a life lived in the interval. And she looked well, not unchanged. We were both 45. We both carried the years visibly, but well. Like someone who had found the shape of a life that fit them. She said, "I've thought about running into you many times. I never knew what I would say." "I have too," I said, which was true. A pause, and then she said something I had not expected. She said, "Can I ask you something? And will you answer honestly?" I said yes. She said, "What did you think I meant that night, in November, when I told you about Seattle?" I looked at her, and I told her. I told her that I had heard her say we'll be fine either way as a kind of preemptive distancing, as a message that she had already decided to move on and was releasing me from any obligation to factor her into my choices. She listened to all of it without interrupting. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Nathan, I said that because I didn't want you to turn down an opportunity you deserved because of me. I was trying to give you permission to go. I wasn't telling you I was going ahead without you. I was terrified you wouldn't take the job because of our friendship. I said we'll be fine because I genuinely believed we would be, because I thought we were the kind of friends who survived distance. I sat with that for a long time. The coffee shop continued around us. Cups clinked. Someone laughed at the counter. The ordinary machinery of a Wednesday morning in Chicago proceeded entirely indifferent to the fact that a 14-year misunderstanding was dissolving at a table near the window. And I said, I thought you were ending it. She said, I thought you were angry at me for going to Seattle. When you barely responded to my text in February, I thought you resented the distance, that you needed me to stay and I hadn't, and you were done with me. We looked at each other. 20 years of knowing each other, 7 of them spent as each other's most important person. 14 of them spent carrying a story that neither of us had ever stopped to verify with the other. We were both wrong, I said. Completely wrong, she said. And then, I don't know which of us started it, we laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes the only available response to something that is both terrible and absurd is laughter. Because 14 years of unnecessary distance is, in its own way, so completely and perfectly human that it is almost funny. Almost. We sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours. I canceled the 11 o'clock meeting. It was the easiest decision I made that year. We talked about what had happened. The November night, the February text, the silence that had followed. With the particular careful honesty of 2 people who have finally given themselves permission to say everything that was not said at the time, not to assign blame. We had both in the silence made our assumptions and held on to them past the point where holding was useful. That was on both of us equally. But we also talked about what the 14 years had contained. Vivian had moved to Seattle. She had worked for a tech company for 3 years before leaving to start her own consulting firm. She had married at 36 a man named Patrick, and a civil engineer who by her description was steady and good and funny in a way that surprised people who didn't know him. They had a daughter who was 6 and currently obsessed with horses in the specific, total way of 6-year-olds who have found their thing. She had not, in those 14 years, been without close friends. She was clear about that. She was not a person who had spent the time in the particular loneliness of someone who has lost their person and never found another. But she had also, she said this carefully, as if she was still deciding whether to say it, never quite had again what we had had. That particular combination of complete ease and complete honesty. The friendship where you did not have to manage yourself. I understood exactly what she meant, because I had not had it again either. I had good friends, and real ones, people I trusted and enjoyed and whose company I genuinely valued. But that specific quality, the quality of being known, not just liked, not just enjoyed, but actually known, I had not found it at that depth again. And I had not fully understood until she named it, sitting across from me in a Chicago coffee shop at 45 years old, that its absence was something I had been carrying all along. I had attributed it to simply growing older, to the reality that the friendships of your 20s have an intensity that adult life cannot quite sustain. I had told myself that what I had missed was youth as much as Vivian specifically. Sitting across from her at 45, I understood that I had been wrong about that too. It was her I had missed. The specific, irreplaceable quality of knowing and being known by this particular person. And I had lost it not because life had changed, or we had grown in different directions, or any of the acceptable reasons that friendships end. I had lost it because on a November night I had heard 3 words and built a story from them without once asking if the story was true. That recognition sat in my chest for the rest of that morning and for many mornings after. It sits there still, sometimes, not painfully, but honestly. We exchanged numbers before we left the coffee shop. not with the performative warmth of people who say we must do this again without meaning it, but with the quiet practicality of two people who have just had a conversation that requires a follow-up and both of them know it. She texted me that evening, and a short message. I keep thinking about what you said, that you heard it as me pulling away. For 14 years I thought I had been too much, that I had made you feel obligated and you took the Chicago job as an exit. I built a whole story too. I replied, 2 completely wrong stories, running parallel to each other for 14 years. That is impressively human of us. She replied, genuinely awful. Also, yes. We talked on the phone that weekend, for 2 hours, about the 14 years, not reliving them in pain, but accounting for them, making the stories real to each other, understanding the particular shape of what each of us had carried. Vivian said something in that phone call that I have thought about many times since. She said, the worst part is not that we lost the 14 years, and the worst part is that I never doubted the story. I was so certain I understood what had happened. I never once thought, maybe I should just ask him. I said, neither did I. She said, we were both so busy protecting ourselves from the rejection we had already decided had happened that we never gave each other the chance to say it hadn't. Yes, that. Exactly that. We are not. I want to be clear about this word binding. We are not the friends we were at 30. We cannot be. The 14 years happened. They contained things we did not share, people we did not meet together, and versions of ourselves that the other never knew. We cannot recover that time. We have not tried to, but we are something. We talk every couple of weeks. Real conversations, not catch-up calls, not the efficient exchange of life updates, and conversations that go where they go and end when they end and occasionally arrive somewhere neither of us expected. She came to Chicago in the summer with Patrick and their daughter Ellie, who did not share Vivian's particular interest in horses, but who shared her mother's habit of making very accurate observations about people and situations in a way that was almost uncomfortable. Watching her do it made me feel, for the first time in 14 years, like I was watching someone I had known her whole life, even though I had not, even though I had missed every year of it. That is the particular bittersweet quality of what we are now, not what we were, not what we would have been, something new, built from the pieces that survived 14 years of an unnecessary silence. It is not enough, but it is real, and real, I have learned. Heck is worth more than I used to understand. I have thought a great deal about what the karma in this story is. There is no villain to receive justice. There is no person whose ruin arrives as the universe is accounting. Nathan heard something wrong and built a story from it. Vivian heard the silence and built a story from that. 2 people, each convinced of a version of events that was entirely constructed from assumption, paid 14 years for the failure to ask a single question. The karma is that. The price of the unasked question. 14 years of a friendship that did not have to be lost. 14 years of each other's ordinary days. The things you tell the person who knows you, the small things and the large ones, the versions of yourself that only exist in the presence of certain people. Simply gone. Not taken by anyone. And not destroyed by cruelty or betrayal or any of the clean, nameable reasons that relationships end. Gone because 2 people were each so afraid of hearing a confirmation of what they feared, that neither of them asked whether what they feared was even true. I carry that as a lesson that I have applied, in the years since the coffee shop, to other relationships in my life. When something feels like a withdrawal, I ask. When a silence seems to carry a message, I ask. When I am on the edge of building a story from limited information, I stop and I ask. It is not always comfortable, but it is always better than the alternative. The alternative cost me 14 years. I cannot afford another 14. Neither can you. I want to ask you something. Is there someone in your life, someone from your past, as someone who mattered, whose absence you have explained to yourself with a story? A story you built from something they did or didn't do, something they said or didn't say. A story that has been sitting in you, unchallenged for years, maybe decades. And I want to ask you, did you ever verify it? Did you ever sit across from that person, or call them, or write them, and say, I have been carrying this story about what happened between us. I want to know if it's true. Because here is what I know now, after a Wednesday morning in Chicago that I did not expect, and a 3-hour conversation I did not plan, and 14 years of an unnecessary loss that I have had to make peace with. The story we tell ourselves about why something ended is almost never the complete truth. It is our version, built from what we observed and what we feared and what we were too proud or too hurt or too convinced to question. It may contain truth. It probably contains real things that really happened, but it is missing the other person's version, and without the other person's version, the story is always incomplete. So I ask you, is there a conversation you have been avoiding? A question you have been too afraid to ask? A door you closed 14 years ago that you have been telling yourself was closed from the other side? Ask the question, not because the answer will always be what you hope for, not because every story has the coffee shop ending. Some of them don't. Some doors were closed from the other side, and learning that is its own kind of grief. But some of them, more than you might expect, were just two people standing on opposite sides of a door that neither of them actually wanted closed. Ask before another 14 years pass. This has been Soul Tales. My name is Nathan. Last week, Vivian sent me a photograph. Her daughter Ellie at a riding lesson, sitting on an enormous horse with the specific expression of a 6-year-old who is trying very hard to be brave and is almost succeeding. She wrote, "Thought you'd appreciate the commitment." I wrote back, "Tell her she has excellent taste." And then I sat for a moment with the extraordinary, ordinary fact of that exchange. 14 years. And now a photograph, a horse, a 6-year-old being brave. I'll take it. End.